Well, the Simon Wiesenthal Center puts out an annual top 10 involving anti-Semitism in the previous year. It's not about statistics, it's about impact. And I think we can unfortunately say that once upon a time we were talking about exceptional situations by individuals primarily, or by a Hamas or a Hezbollah or an Iran. But now we have to deal with the reality during COVID and probably going forward, in which the various streams of anti-Semitism have managed to make their way into the mainstream of our culture, of our social settings, and of our political discourse. And not to, of course, also talk about the disastrous situation on so many campuses. So all this takes place at a time over the last 2 years where so many of us have been locked down. We don't have really a normal life to speak of, and yet we see this explosion of anti-Semitism. Our goal this year is to call out that very uncomfortable fact that we're no longer just talking about the lunatic fringe. We're talking about the failure of major corporations and major gatekeepers of information to deal as seriously with anti-Semitism as they would with an attack on African Americans or Asian Americans or any other minorities.
Major corporations. So Unilever is listed on your list. Are they typical of the category you're describing?
No, I don't think there is a typical address. That's part of the problem that is both disconcerting, but also one of the reasons why we're trying to act so aggressively at this point. Unilever is a powerhouse, a global powerhouse. Their CEO is based in London. They own and trade companies like we would be trading baseball cards. One of the money makers in their stable is Ben & Jerry's. And as we know, an aggressive anti-Semite, extreme hater of Israel, who's at the top of their corporate board structure, has been leading the way in anti-Israel activity and pushed for a full boycott of Israel. Eventually, we know now, of course, that Ben & Jerry's tagged East Jerusalem and the West Bank. But everybody knows what the real goal here. This is a person who supports BDS, and it was a big boost for BDS. And we wanted to send, and will continue to work hard to send, a message to Unilever that if you're going to essentially throw the Jewish community and Israel under the bus, there's going to be a price to pay for that kind of irresponsible behavior. And we have nothing against Unilever. People own stock in it. They should continue to make billions of dollars. That's not the issue. But they need to make sure that this kind of political activism that's immoral, that is historically wrong, and is illegal in many states, is reversed. They have the clout to do it, and if not, they should just get rid of Ben & Jerry's and take another one of their ice cream entities and give them the same route to apply in Israel and the West Bank.
On the list you have social media giants. Who would you consider in that category?
Telegram, TikTok, Twitter. As we speak, Twitter still gives full access to the Ayatollah Khomeini, and him and his minions every day talk about a genocide, a final solution against the Jewish people. There's no filter and no explanation and no excuse given. Now, that was enraging enough before Twitter and other social media companies went political and took a direct involvement in bringing down a sitting president of the United States, then took a direct involvement, something we assume that our doctors, family doctors, should do, in deciding what kind of information about the COVID pandemic we should be getting. And they do so, frankly, colluding with each other. So what we have seen, insofar as these companies are concerned, is they have the tools to really seriously degrade Jew hatred on social media platforms, they're not fully serious in doing it. And Facebook, after we fought with them for a decade to finally say that Holocaust denial would be removed, that didn't stop them from taking money from some anti-vaxxer group that used Holocaust or misappropriated Holocaust imagery for paid ads on Facebook. So it's time for these companies to get serious. Telegram, is based in Russia, I believe, in the Ukraine. It's a huge presence. They're all over the place in terms of what they will and won't take off. Very difficult to deal with. TikTok, there's plenty been written about them. And if people want to know more about the specifics that we're concerned about, if you go to Wiesenthal.com, and you can go to the top 10 or just look it up. In the last couple of months, we've actually produced the reports about TikTok, about Telegram, online, so that people will understand the scope of the failure that we highlighted today on the list.
Would you include YouTube on that list?
YouTube, again, is a mixed bag. What they do and don't remove, they have taken off an enormous amount of material. Part of the problem with YouTube from day one is, even when you get them to act quickly, you already have that presentation with the YouTube indicia on it. And so even if it's removed, there are now so many other social media platforms who either don't care or actually identify with extremism, that it's a problem. But insofar as Twitter is concerned, there's no excuse. Years ago, we gave them an F for failing to act against ISIS until Congress made them to do so. They're heading in the same direction. Mid-March we'll be coming out with our annual report on internet and social media, along with the report card. And those that we name and shame are going to be at the bottom of the barrel.
So the Simon Wiesenthal Center Museum of Tolerance have used the Holocaust as a basis historically for promoting tolerance and counter-racism. And traditionally, the ADL has been the one who's been fighting anti-Semitism. Why does the Wiesenthal Center feel the need now to step up with this kind of thing?
With all due respect, and you're a good friend, you're dead wrong.
Go ahead.
The Digital Terrorism and Hate Project is in its 28th year. Our first meeting with Facebook was when they had one building. Now they own, I think, 4 zip codes up there. So our involvement and interaction with the social media giants and calling out online hate goes back now nearly 3 decades. I think more to the point, and just to also everyone understand, the Museum of Tolerance is our teaching arm. It's here to teach anyone who's ready to come through its doors. It doesn't take stances on issues per se, but you're right. The underlying message of the 7+ million people who've come through here is personal responsibility and critical thinking, and making sure you take accountability for what you do. So that is true. But insofar as taking stances on corporations and all the rest, that's the parent. That's the aggressive Jewish human rights NGO, the Wiesenthal Center, where we've been at the UN now for, I think, 30 years. We're a top-tier NGO at UNESCO with the Organization of American States, at the European Parliament. So we're a different breed than the Anti-Defamation League or the American Jewish Committee. They all have their important roles to play. We're a teaching institution, but an aggressive defender of our people. And just to understand it is the promise that was made to Simon Wiesenthal in 1977 when Rabbi Heyer went to see him in Vienna. King Solomon says that a good name is more precious than oil. We're here to take your good name. And Mr. Wiesenthal said, well, wait a second. What are you going to be doing? If you're just going to be building a museum, which is a wonderful thing where people come to say Kaddish twice a year, I'll write you a letter. If you want my name, I'm an activist. And the next time there is a threat, it may not be a man with a funny little mustache, and the targets may not be Jews, But if you're ready to be activists, as well as helping me with Nazi war criminals, and all the rest, defending Israel, then you can have my name. So I've been around long enough to know about that exchange, and something we think about every day here at the Wiesenthal Center. So if you may be hearing more directly from us these days, maybe it's because we're the ones who take more direct action and are less concerned about being politically correct.
Speaking about politics, you have on the list here CARE,
Yes.
who is Jewish Voice for Peace, which is also a very pro-Muslim organization, Hamas and Iran, Islamist State of Iran. Do you have any thoughts about the upcoming legislation being proposed about Islamophobia? It might be used as a buffer to squelch criticism of political acts against Israel, or criticisms of Islamist actions against moderate Muslims.
Yeah, so first a comment that the Simon Wiesenthal Center, myself, in this case, in the lead, we spend a lot of time in the course of a year dealing with, working with, allying with, and seeking out moderate Muslims all over the world. And so we helped with the building blocks towards peace in the Gulf states. Our first visit to the UAE was 14 years ago. Our first visit to Bahrain was 6 years ago. Azerbaijan, Indonesia, etc. And just 2 weeks ago, on a Saturday night in Dubai, had a long meeting with a leading Muslim figure from Sudan, whose among the issues he brought up was the fact that his country didn't have enough vaccine. We're arguing here, take it, not take it. How about entire countries that have nothing? So first, for the record, is that the Wiesenthal Center and the Museum of Tolerance, very proud of our record, proactive record of interacting with and working with Muslims all over the world. We'll continue that effort, throw in Morocco and various other countries I can't yet talk about, but that's part of our responsibility. I would just give one word of caution in terms of any bill or whatever, and it comes from our own experience. Until such time as there was an IRA definition of anti-Semitism, people who expressed anti-Semitism often got away with it because the institution said, I need a definition. I need a legal definition, something I can hang my hat on so I can push back. That's now finally taken place after many, many years, despite the fact that there are extremists who, look, the situation is IRA has been adopted in Bahrain by the King Hamad Global Center for Coexistence and Peace. They embraced IRA in a written MOU with the United States State Department. USC hasn't.
Would you clarify what the acronym IRA stands for?
It is the International Holocaust Remembrance Association that came up with a definition which is now increasingly being adopted by countries, localities, and other institutions. And so I think that the issue that some have raised is a legitimate concern to raise, and the way in which to address it now, not later, is by coming up with a definition, or as we say in Hebrew, dalet amot. Give us the context. When you talk about anti-Semitism, some people say, well, whenever you criticize Israel, you must be an anti-Semite. Well, that would make the Knesset one of the most anti-Semitic places on the planet. In terms of quote-unquote Islamophobia, it needs to be defined because I guess if you believe that you're above criticism, CARE might say that this list promotes Islamophobia. It doesn't. It fights against anti-Semitism, and the track record of both the center and the museum in terms of working with and promoting multi-faith peace and activity on behalf of humanitarian causes speaks for itself.
So these attacks on Jews that come from Muslims, that are maybe they're riled up during times, for example, in May when there was a Hamas-Israel conflagration, but the attacks are against synagogues, for instance. Is objecting to that Islamophobia under the new proposed legislation?
I have no idea, but I would say that anybody who has the chutzpah to try to do that would not be doing any favors to American Muslims when a real incident involving Islamophobia is. Just like the state of Israel, our own community, nobody gets a moral blank check and no one's perfect. You have to take responsibility for what you do. The notion that you just take a phrase called Islamophobia and then put that up as a shield from any legitimate or even controversial statements and criticisms, that's not going to cut it. It's not going to help American Muslims, and it's not going to stifle appropriate criticism when criticism is due. And remember, we have one Jewish state. There are scores of Muslim countries and societies around the world. Mm-hmm. There are many and deep divisions within Islam. So it's not simple, but we can just tell folks who are worried about that issue, you should take a page from the Jewish community's experience. Until you have a definition that the world can take seriously, it in some ways creates more problems than it would resolve.